Robert Frost begins his poem entitled Mending Wall with the line, "Something there is that doesn't love a wall." He goes on to describe how his neighbor each spring, after the winter has disassembled some of the stones on the wall that divides their property, as they're putting the stones back in the wall, the neighbor quotes his father saying, "Good fences make good neighbors." As the poem continues, Frost thinks to himself, "Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down." The poem ends, "He will not get behind his father's saying, and he likes have thought of it so well. He says again, good fences makes good neighbors." Next Sunday, Patty Smith, who is on our conference staff, will be here for our Fifth Sunday Assembly, and she'll be speaking on what we refer to, what the conference refers to, as safe sanctuary practices. Basically, what those practices are rules for those of us in the community to follow to make sure that all persons have their personal boundaries respected, that no one stronger takes advantage of someone who is weaker for their own advantage. Now, we are familiar enough with the news to know that that is a particularly sensitive, loud today issue in religious communities. And I agree that we should be mindful, we should be conscious of those practices so that no one's safety, no one's person, no one's selfhood is placed in jeopardy among us. But at the same time, I think we also need to hear Robert Frost's wisdom in that as we reinforce our personal boundaries, if we're not careful, we may wall in ourselves and wall out ourselves from others, and in the process do ourselves harm, even while we're trying to protect ourselves from harm. Can you see that? Jesus was a boundary trespasser. Jesus took delight in dismantling walls that separated those whom God willed to join together. One day, Jesus and his disciples are passing through Samaria. You've got Judea down to the south where Jerusalem is, and Jericho. You've got a middle area called Samaria, and then you've got Galilee where Nazareth, Capernaum, Sea of Galilee is up in the north of that long country, narrow country of Israel. It's midday, it's hot, the sun is overhead. They stop at Jacob's well for a drink of water. They get a drink of water. The disciples go shopping. They go to provide provisions for them to have something to eat. Jesus, though, stays behind at the well. And while he's at the well, a woman comes to fetch her daily supply of water in her big water jar. Now, that is an unusual occurrence because it was the custom in that day for the women of the village to go to the well in the morning when it was cooler. And so for a woman to go to the well at midday when it's hot is a signal that something's going on here. Jesus asked the woman for a drink of water. And that request turns into the longest conversation that Jesus has with anyone in all four Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, no one has this long a conversation with Jesus than this woman. The encounter is full of first. Except for Jesus' own mother at the wedding of Cana, remember, in Galilee, where he turns the water into wine at his mother's urging. Except for his mother, this is the first woman Jesus talks to in John's Gospel. She is also the first person in the Gospel to whom Jesus reveals who he is. And this is the first person in the gospel that becomes an evangelist and goes and tells others. I think I've met the Messiah, God's anointed one. Well, let us overhear that conversation that Jesus has with the Samaritan woman. And I'm reading again from the Voice, which is put in conversational form. Jesus, to her, would you draw water and give me a drink? The woman is shocked. I can't believe that you, a Jew, would associate with me, a Samaritan woman, much less ask me for a drink, because what unclean people touched became unclean, and so for her to dip into the well to get water would have made the water unclean, and a good Jew would not have drunk that water. The woman has 3 strikes against her. First, she's Samaritan. Let me refresh our memories about the Samaritans. When the Babylonians conquered the Jews in Israel and carted the professionals, those who had something to contribute to Babylonian society and culture, they left behind those that were thought to be less desirable, burdens to society. And while those persons were there, foreigners filled the vacuum, intermarried with those Jews, so that those Jews now became a mixed breed, half-breeds. They were not pure Jews. First strike, she's a Samaritan. Second, and by the way, that bad blood, literally, that bad blood between them had been going on for 500 years. In addition to being a Samaritan, the second strike against her is that she was a woman. And we all know the status of women in that day. Men would wake up in the morning and pray to God, God, I thank you that I am not a woman. All right, fess up, men. How many of you in the morning get up and... Men would not speak to women in public. Husbands would not even speak to their wives in public. Second strike. First, she's a Samaritan. Second strike, she's a woman. And the third strike is one that she knows, and she doesn't know Jesus knows, but we're going to find out he does. That for whatever reason, we usually kind of fill in the reasoning with some spicy, sensational reasons. But whatever the reason, she has had 5 husbands, and the man she's now living with, because after 3, a woman couldn't have any more husbands. She's living with a man who's not her husband. You've heard the expression, he can't keep a job. Well, this woman couldn't keep a husband for whatever reason. So, third strike. And so Jesus speaks to a woman, a Samaritan woman, and in so doing crosses several accepted, hard and fast, taken for granted boundaries. But the walls everyone else takes for granted, Jesus doesn't. Jesus, you don't know, speaking to the woman, you don't know the gift of God or who is asking you for a drink of this water from Jacob's well, because if you did, you would have asked for something greater. You would have asked for living water. Sir, you sit by this deep well, a thirsty man, without a bucket in sight. Where does this living water come from? Are you claiming superiority to our father Jacob, who labored long and hard to dig and maintain this well so that he could share clean water with his sons and grandchildren and cattle? Remember Nicodemus last Sunday, and how Nicodemus kept asking Jesus practical, logical questions, and Jesus kept answering his questions with illogical answers? How can a grown man crawl back into his mother's womb and be born a second time? Jesus, drink this water, and your thirst is quenched for only a moment, and you must return to this well again and again. I offer water that will become a wellspring within you that gives life throughout eternity. You will never be thirsty again. Please, sir, Please give me some of this water so I won't have to make this daily trip to the well carrying this heavy pot of water to my home. The woman hears about water that quenches one's thirst forever, and she thinks, golly, if I had this kind of water, I could spend my day doing something else other than fetching water at this well. Jesus, bring me your husband. Woman, I don't have a husband. Jesus, technically you're telling the truth, but you have had 5 husbands, and the man you are now with, you're not married to. Woman, sir, you obviously are a prophet. Our fathers worshiped here on this mountain, but your people say that Jerusalem is the only place for all to worship. Since you're a prophet, which is it? I've always thought that, like many of us, when someone begins to become a little too perceptive and see right through us to our truth, what do? We throw up a wall of diversion to take the person's x-ray vision off of us. This stranger that's talking this foreign language about living water obviously knows her secret pain, which means it's no longer a secret to him. And so what does she do? She changes the subject. When the Jews told the Samaritans, when they returned back from Babylon to rebuild the temple, when those who had been left behind, the mixed breeds, the Samaritans, offered to help, the purebreds said, no, you're unclean. You can't lay a hand on the temple. And so these outsiders go to a different location, build their own place of worship so that they can now be insiders. No one likes to feel excluded. No one likes to feel judged so that they're left outside looking in. And so the Samaritans have built their own place of worship at Gerizim. So Jesus, which is it? Jerusalem or Gerizim? Jesus, woman, I tell you that it's neither. But a new day is coming. In fact, it's already here, when the importance will not be put on the time and place of worship, but on the truthful hearts of the worshipers. The Father is Spirit, and He is seeking followers whose worship arises in spirit and in truth. Regardless of whether you are in Jerusalem or on this mountain, if you do not seek the Father, then you do not worship the way the Father wants to be worshiped. Woman, these mysteries will be made clear by the one who is promised, by God's anointed one, God's Messiah. When the Messiah comes, he'll clear up all of this. Jesus, he's speaking to you. I am. Have you heard that name before? I am the one you have been looking for. Now, as happened last week with Nicodemus, we see it happening again with this woman. She ends up saying more than she knew she was saying until Jesus kind of excavated it. She thinks she's directing Jesus' attention from her secret hurt, her secret sin, possibly. And where she goes is where the hurt can be healed or where the sin can be forgiven. She was right. This is a deep well. In fact, it's so deep, it goes all the way to the eternal God. She raises the topic of worship, believing that this is an academic, interreligious debate. And what she discovers is that worship is profoundly personal. For the worship that God desires includes all of us, mind, body, spirit, our inner life, our secret sins, our wounds, our hurts, our fears, our doubts. It entails truth and spirit that refuses to be confined within any boundaries and by any walls, including the place we worship. When the disciples return, they can't believe Jesus is talking to a Samaritan woman. The woman goes back to town, leaving her water pot. Could it be that she now is no longer interested in the water, just the water that satisfies the thirst of the tongue, because she's now tasted the living water that Jesus says he's offering her? She stops everyone she meets, and we're told, even men. Remember how men weren't supposed to talk to women in public? Women weren't supposed to talk to men in public. She can't contain herself. Again, boundaries. When you taste that living water, you want everyone to have some. And so she tells both the men and the women about her encounter. She says, I met a stranger who knew everything about me. Come, see for yourselves. Can he be the anointed one, the one sent from God, the Messiah? I think what she was really saying is he saw right through me to all of my truth, all of my secrets that I'm exhausting myself trying to hide. He saw them all, but he loved me anyway, despite them all. Isn't this the good news of God in Jesus Christ? That God's love refuses to be contained within the boundaries that create suspicion and distrust. Again, walls that separate what God intends to be together. Who God intends to be together. Jesus has a way of surprising us by refusing to obey our no trespassing signs. In 1996, an African-American boy moved with his family to Washington, D.C. to an all-white neighborhood. He wondered what would happen. He had heard about crossing the color line. His parents had sheltered him as much as they could. His apprehension was realized one day. He and his two brothers were sitting out on the front porch. And as one person after another went by the house, they looked up at the boys, and neither waved nor smiled. And he thought to himself, we are not welcomed here. They do not want us in their neighborhood. Along came an older woman. She had been left off at the bus stop and was walking home on the other side of the street. And she smiled and waved at the boys. And she went into our house and came out with a tray of drinks and cream cheese and jelly sandwiches and walked across the street and offered those treats to the boys. This young African-American boy said this gesture changed his life. 1966, you know the age, you know the time, you know the period. Right before Martin Luther King was assassinated. He said this simple gesture showed him that a black family could feel at home in a white neighborhood. That it was possible for relationships to be formed across the great divide of race. That the age-old boundaries that we humans have constructed are not eternal, and that God is determined to tear them down. Stephen Carter is now a law professor at Yale, and he's written a book about what he learned that day. It's entitled simply Civility. The woman was Sarah Kestenbaum. He writes, a religious Jew who was simply doing what her religion told her to do. Carter writes, to this day, I can close my eyes and feel on my tongue the smooth sweetness of the cream cheese and jelly sandwiches that I gobbled up on that summer afternoon when I learned how a single act of genuine and unassuming civility can change a life forever. We don't know, we aren't given the name of this Samaritan woman that Jesus meets at the well. We knew the man, the leader of the Pharisees, member of the Sanhedrin. We knew his name last week, Nicodemus, but as a woman, she's not named. I wonder if her name was Sarah. Sarah, who, as it were, passed on what she had received, living water in the form of a few glasses of iced tea and cream cheese and jelly sandwiches. to 3 frightened little boys saying, "Welcome to the neighborhood." Word is that someone saw all of this happen and later reported it was as though they were having Holy Communion and worshiping in spirit and in truth.